On the night of April 22nd, 1453, close to 70 warships sailed over a hill. Not around it, over it. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II was 21 years old, and he had a problem. An enormous iron chain stretched across the harbour of Constantinople, locking his entire fleet out of the city. So that night, he ordered his men to grease a mountain pass with animal fat, lay wooden rails across it, and drag his navy up and over by moonlight. By dawn, the defenders of the most fortified city in Europe looked up the hillside and saw a forest of masts cresting the ridge. 5 weeks later, a 1,000-year empire was over. The city changed hands, changed names, and kept going. Now stand on that same shoreline today. You will not see a chain or a fleet. You will see 15 million people living across 2 continents, seagulls wheeling over container ships the size of small towns, old men fishing off the rails of a passing ferry, a tea seller calling through the cabin, and the late light breaking on a dome that has been catching the sun in almost exactly the same way for nearly 1,500 years. That dome is Hagia Sophia, and the city around it has been 3 different cities stacked on the same strip of ground. Byzantium, then Constantinople, then Istanbul. 26 centuries on the same hills, and it has almost never gone empty. How does a single patch of land hold that much history and still be standing? We are going to walk through every layer. 2,600 years, 13 time windows, one straight watching every version of the city come and go. Old engravings, mosaics, Ottoman miniatures, ruined walls, and early photographs, rebuilt through AI-assisted reconstruction, so we can see Constantinople when it still had emperors, and walk streets that were burned to ash 1,000 years ago. Informed visualizations, not magic, but they let us see what the chronicles can only describe. One thing runs through every single era: the Bosphorus. The narrow strait that made this city inevitable and almost destroyed it 6 times. Keep your eye on the water. It is the one character that never leaves the frame. Let's go back, all the way back, to a rock, a harbour, and a Greek with a map. Over 2,500 years ago, a group of Greek settlers from the Aegean pull their boats onto a shingle beach and decide, here, this is the place. And you can see why. On the tip of a peninsula jutting between 2 seas, there's a deep, curving inlet. A natural harbour so sheltered it feels carved for them. Later people will call it the Golden Horn. Above it rises a rocky hill, a natural acropolis where you can see every approach for miles. Behind them, fresh water. In front of them, the narrowest sea choke between Europe and Asia. Every ship going north or south has to pass right by. It's a city planner's dream. And for centuries, it goes almost nowhere. A visualization built from scattered archaeology and early Greek descriptions would show a low, scruffy colony. Wooden houses with stone foundations, smoke curling from hearths, nets drying over rocks, sheep grazing on slopes that someday will be downtown. Salt wind off the strait, the smell of timber, goat hide, and charcoal. A few thousand people at most, a temple or 2, a working port, nothing grander. But the location is too valuable to leave alone. Persians take it, Spartans take it. Athenians take it. The town changes hands, gets besieged, sacked, rebuilt, besieged again. A whole generation grows up, then another, and the fortunes keep sloshing in and out with the tide. For centuries, nothing about this scrappy trading post suggests what it's about to become. A minor dot on maps of a Mediterranean dominated by Athens, then Alexandria, then, eventually, Rome. Then, in the early 300s, a Roman emperor looks at this same headland and sees an entire empire. In 330, Constantine dedicates a new capital on these 7 hills, and the scale is unlike anything the old Greek colony has ever felt. Construction dust everywhere, marble barged in from quarries across the Mediterranean, columns hauled by teams of oxen up muddy slopes. You'd hear workmen shouting in Latin, in Greek, in Aramaic, in Gothic. The smell of mortar and fresh cut stone, horse sweat, charcoal smoke. Entire forests of scaffolding, temples going up, churches going up, a palace quarter rising over the old Acropolis. At the heart of it, a hippodrome, a massive chariot racing arena that will beat like a drum at the center of city life for 1,000 years. A long column in a new forum, topped with a statue of the emperor himself. A ring of walls sketching out a footprint so ambitious that, at first, most of it is just fields with roads running through them. Because here's the surprise. At its founding, the new capital is half empty. Constantine knows it, so he hands out free grain, tax breaks, free housing to anyone who'll move. Senators get plots of land, craftsmen get workshops. Come here, he's saying, and we'll make you richer than Rome ever did. And they come, slowly at first, then in a flood. Scholars, priests, engineers, merchants from every shore of the Mediterranean. The old Rome, the one in Italy, begins to fade, sacked by barbarians, hollowed out by politics. The new Rome on the Bosphorus absorbs its books, its laws, its gods, and then, eventually, its one god. A generation after Constantine dies, his gamble is paying off. 2 generations later, his new capital is the richest city in the Western world. And it's about to build the building that will define it for the next 15 centuries. In the year 537, the Emperor Justinian walks into a brand new cathedral, looks up at a dome that seems to float on light, and, legend says, whispers that he has outdone Solomon himself. That's Hagia Sophia. A visualization would show candles by the thousand flickering against gold mosaic, incense curling up into the dome, sunlight pouring through 40 windows at the base so the whole vault seems to hang in mid-air. Silk merchants in the markets outside, aqueducts hissing fresh water across the city. Underground, enormous cisterns vault out in forests of reused columns, dark and cool, storing water against siege. The city is now sealed on its landward side by the Theodosian walls, a triple ring of stone and brick raised in the previous century running coast to coast. It will be the hardest to crack fortification in the world for the next 1,000 years. On race days, the hippodrome roars with tens of thousands of fans, split into blue and green factions, half sports club, half street gang. But this golden city is almost extinguished twice in Justinian's own lifetime. First, the Nika riots. A sports quarrel spirals into an uprising that nearly burns the city down and nearly ends Justinian with it. Whole districts go up in flames. The earlier cathedral on the site is one of the casualties. Second, a plague rolls in through the harbour ships and kills an enormous share of the population. Historians estimate a third, possibly more. Funeral barges move out on the Golden Horn for months. And here's the strange thing. That fire is what gives us Hagia Sophia. Justinian rebuilds, bigger, bolder, more outrageous than the church he'd lost. The catastrophe becomes the masterpiece. Glory like this draws enemies from every horizon. Between roughly the 7th and 9th centuries, wave after wave of attackers try this city. Arab fleets in the early decades, Slavs from the north, Bulgars from the west, more Arabs a century later. The walls get tested the way nothing in the ancient world was tested. A visualization drawn from chronicles and later engravings. Fleets massing in the Marmara. Sails like a second city on the water. A heavy iron chain stretched across the mouth of the Golden Horn. Close the harbour and you choke the attack. On the land walls, defenders in layered armour watch columns of enemy tents stretch to the horizon. And then, something almost unbelievable. From the deck of a Byzantine ship, a bronze tube swivels out over the rail, and liquid fire. A naval incendiary whose exact recipe was a closely guarded secret that no modern chemist has ever fully reconstructed, spits across the water. It sticks. It floats. It burns on the sea. Enemy ships catch. Smoke blackens the strait. Attackers fall back. Meanwhile, inside the walls, another war is being fought. A quieter, uglier one. For decades at a stretch, the empire turns on its own art. Emperors outlaw religious images. Mosaics get painted over. Monks are driven out. Monasteries emptied. Then the pendulum swings back. Icons return. The mosaics are painstakingly restored. Then it swings again. The empire loses most of its territory in this era. Egypt, Syria, North Africa, gone. What's left of it pulls tight around the capital like a fist. It's almost a city-state now, a tight ring of walls, fed by its sea, defended by its chain and its secret fire.
And spices from the east.
And yet, it survives. Survival breeds a second golden age. By the Middle Byzantine centuries, roughly the 900s and 1000s, the city has reinvented itself as the great commercial crossroads of the Christian world. Walk the markets of the Meze, the main boulevard, in your mind's eye. Rus traders down from Kiev with furs and amber. Varangian Norsemen who row all the way from Scandinavia looking for work as imperial bodyguards. Venetians, Genoese, Pisans, Arab merchants, Armenian silversmiths, a thriving Jewish quarter on the Horn, languages stacked 3 deep on every corner. The air smells of bread from public ovens, of spices from the covered markets, of fish being gutted at the water, of tanneries where the wind drops it on you all at once. Monasteries ring bells every few hours. Relics, fragments of saints, pieces of the true cross, icons believed to work miracles, draw pilgrims from as far away as England. Foreign visitors write home about it and run out of superlatives. One medieval account calls it unreal, half a dream. By most estimates, it's the largest and richest city in Christian Europe, possibly by a factor of several. Paris and London at this point are muddy market towns by comparison. The great palace complex on the eastern tip glitters with imperial ceremony. Mechanical singing birds in the throne room, a throne that rises in the air to astonish ambassadors. The hippodrome still runs. New monasteries keep rising on the hills. Scribes in quiet cells are copying Greek classics that Western Europe has half forgotten. Plato, Aristotle, old tragedies, preserving a library that will one day feed the Renaissance. But the foreign traders are getting privileges, extraordinary privileges, Venice especially. Their quarter on the Golden Horn becomes almost a state within the state. They control more and more of the shipping, pay lower tariffs than locals, answer to their own courts. The locals resent it. Generations pass, the resentment curdles. That resentment is going to detonate. And the detonation is coming from people the city thought were allies. In 1204, a crusade that was supposedly heading for Egypt turns up at the sea walls of Constantinople instead. They're not Muslim armies, they're Venetians and French knights, Western Christians, nominal allies. The reasons are tangled: debt, broken promises, a disputed throne. The result is not tangled at all. A visualization from the chronicles, including eyewitness accounts on both sides, would show Crusader galleys rowed right up against the sea walls of the Golden Horn. Siege towers on the ships, scaling ladders swung from mast to parapet, knights clanking onto the battlements in full armor. The walls that faced the land had held for 800 years. The walls that faced this friendly sea had never imagined this. They break in. What follows is 3 days that historians still talk about as one of the worst sacks in European history. Palaces looted, tombs of emperors pried open, statues torn from pedestals in the hippodrome, gold peeled off altars. The enormous wealth of centuries, carted to the ships and shipped west. Treasures end up in cities like Venice, including famous bronze horses that will stand over St. Mark's Basilica for the next 8 centuries. A lot is simply destroyed or melted down for the metal. Latin rulers install themselves in the Great Palace. Byzantine nobles flee across the water and set up rump courts in places like Nicaea. The greatest Christian city on earth becomes a half-abandoned Western outpost, its people impoverished, its monuments picked clean. And here's the dark irony. No Persian army, no Arab fleet, no Bulgar horde ever managed this. It was fellow Christians who finally cracked the city open. When the Greeks come back in 1261, the city they reclaim is a shadow. From 1261 up toward 1453, nearly 2 centuries, Constantinople is a haunted capital. An empire in name, a city running on fumes. A walk through the peninsula in, say, the early 1400s would feel uncanny. The Theodosian walls still ring the full ancient footprint, but inside them, great stretches have gone back to countryside. Vegetable gardens in old forums, goats grazing in ruined porticos, cisterns collapsed and overgrown. churches patched with mismatched stone, whole abandoned neighborhoods that travelers describe as almost rural, wildflowers growing through the paving. The imperial court still functions, but at a fraction of the old splendor. Ceremonies are scaled down. Gold is sold to pay debts. The emperor at one point has to pawn the crown jewels. Across the Golden Horn, meanwhile, there's a strange new silhouette. The Genoese, granted their own walled district at Galata, are booming. Their tower rises sharp and tall over the water. Their ships crowd their harbour. It's essentially an Italian city-state right across the water from a decaying Greek one, and the Italian side is winning. And in Anatolia, a new power is growing fast: the Ottomans. They take territory piece by piece, this town, that province, that coastline. They don't even need to storm the capital, they just keep surrounding it. By the middle of the 1400s, Constantinople is a small Christian island inside a large Muslim empire. Food supplies are squeezed, trade routes are rerouted. The population, which once topped 500,000 at its peak, has likely fallen to a fraction of that. Then, in the spring of 1453, a 21-year-old Ottoman Sultan named Mehmed arrives outside the walls with a new kind of weapon. Everything the city has survived for 1100 years is about to be tested one last time. In May 1453, the Theodosian walls finally fall. What changes the game is artillery. Mehmed II has commissioned enormous bombards, cannons so big they have to be dragged into position by dozens of oxen and can only fire a few times a day. They hammer the walls for weeks. Dust rises in a permanent cloud along the land approach. At night, repairs. By day, more bombardment. Another stone section gone. The final assault comes through a breach on the land side. By the afternoon, Ottoman banners are going up on the walls. The last Byzantine emperor is said to have died fighting somewhere in the chaos, his body never definitively identified. Smoke hangs over the city for days. And then something unexpected, a building boom. Within months, scaffolding is everywhere. New markets, new mosques, new waterworks. On the old Acropolis point, where Byzantine emperors once held court, Mehmed begins construction of a new palace complex, Topkapi. Hagia Sophia is converted into a mosque. Minarets will rise at its corners over the following decades. The covered bazaar that will become the Grand Bazaar starts to take shape. But the bigger move is demographic. Mehmed wants this half-empty city full again. So he invites, and sometimes compels, people to move in. Muslims from across Anatolia. Greeks who'd fled are urged back and granted protections. Armenians are brought from eastern towns. Jewish communities, many fleeing persecution in Western Europe, are welcomed and given entire quarters. Each community gets its own streets, its own houses of worship, its own markets, its own neighborhood leaders who answer, in turn, to the palace. The city learns a new rhythm. 5 calls to prayer a day, church bells, synagogue singing, all within a few blocks, all woven into the same working day. Within one lifetime, Constantinople, now increasingly called Istanbul in daily speech, is fuller, louder, and more diverse than it has been in centuries. By the mid-1500s, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the skyline has been rewritten. 7 hills, 7 great imperial mosque complexes. The architect who designs most of the masterpieces, Mimar Sinan, spends a career experimenting with the dome, trying to go higher, wider, lighter. The Suleymaniye crowns a hilltop like a careful geometric crown, cascading half-domes and 4 pencil-thin minarets. The streets below are roaring. Caravanserais pulse with traders from Persia, from the Balkans, from the Indian Ocean rim. Bolts of silk, sacks of pepper, copper, incense. Coffee arrives, and the first coffee houses open, and get banned, and reopen, because nothing can stop coffee once it starts. Janissary processions clank through the streets in white-plumed hats. The imperial kitchens at Topkapı feed thousands of people, every day, forever. On the Bosphorus, imperial barges, long, gilded, rowed by teams of oarsmen in matching tunics, carry the Sultan between his waterfront pavilions and his hunting grounds. Ambassadors from Venice, France, England wait for audiences and write letters home describing a city that, they say, surpasses all description. One Habsburg envoy describes walking through the streets in a daze, writing that every corner turned up a new fountain, a new mosque, a new crowd speaking a language he didn't recognize. By most estimates, this is now the largest city in Europe again, a full circle from its Byzantine peak more than 1,000 years later, under a completely different faith, a completely different language, a completely different empire. Same hills, but the glitter hides the churn. Plague rolls through the crowded quarters on a grim cycle, every few years for generations. Fires sweep the timber neighborhoods with terrifying speed. A single unattended hearth in a packed alley can take out a district by dawn. And under the imperial splendor, inequality widens. A sultan's feast, a shipwright's children. Same city, very different lives. The next 2 centuries will test whether this size can last. Across the long 1600s and 1700s, the city becomes a study in contrasts. On the Bosphorus shores, timber mansions called yalas line the water. Painted wood, latticed windows, jetties where small boats tie up. Grand families summer there. Inside, carved ceilings, cushions, tiled fireplaces. Outside, fishermen, melon vendors, the soft slap of oars. During one stretch early in the 1700s, so famous it would be named after the flower it adored, courtiers throw candlelit tulip viewing parties,
courtiers gather for tulip
rowed
viewing
pleasure
parties,
boats,
where the
hundreds of
flower
lamps
becomes a
set
symbol
afloat
of
on the
refinement
strait,
and the eerie
poetry
fancy
competitions.
beauty.
And then, again and again, the fires. The old city is mostly wood. It burns. A kitchen mishap in a bakery, a knocked-over lamp in a coffee house, and entire neighborhoods go up. European visitors joke, darkly, that you can date an Istanbul neighborhood by which great fire it was rebuilt after. Charitably exaggerated, not entirely wrong. The rebuilds use the same flammable wood. Because it's cheap, because it's fast, because it's what the craftsmen know. So the cycle runs again. Meanwhile, the empire itself is losing battles at the edges. Territory shrinks, tax revenues wobble. In the capital, the Janissary Corps, once the Sultan's elite soldiers, becomes a political force that removes sultans, blocks reforms, and occasionally riots through the streets when they aren't paid. Reforms get attempted and rolled back. But here's what stays alive even as the empire frays: the street itself. Stand in a market in, say, the 1750s, and you'll hear Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Ladino Spanish from the Jewish quarter, Arabic from travelers, Italian from merchants, French from diplomats, all inside one crowd. In pure human variety, this may still be one of the most cosmopolitan places on Earth. Then the 19th century arrives. Steam changes everything. Through the 1800s, the silhouettes on the Bosphorus change. Sail gives way to steam. Black smoke streaks the sky over the strait for the first time. Regular ferry lines start stitching the two shores together. Europe to Asia, 20 minutes for a copper coin. Iron bridges span the Golden Horn, replacing earlier wood ones. Horse-drawn trams clank up new boulevards. Gaslight and then electric light glows on the avenues of Pera, the European-flavoured district on the hill across the Horn from the old city. Pera feels in these years like a slice of Paris or Vienna dropped on a Bosphorus hillside. European-style apartment blocks with wrought iron balconies, embassies behind tall gates, patisseries, department stores with plate glass windows, gaslit arcades where the nightlife pours out in multiple languages. A short underground funicular, the Tunnel, one of the oldest underground railways in the world, lifts passengers from the waterfront up to the avenue in about 90 seconds. Down at the water, the Orient Express rolls in at the end of its long run from Paris, unloading travellers into the grandest terminus on the Bosphorus. Along the shore, a new imperial palace, Dolmabahce, gleams in neo-Baroque marble, replacing medieval Topkapi as the Sultan's main residence. Crystal chandeliers from Bohemia, staircases of alabaster. But the reforms that launched this boom can't stop what's happening at the edges of the empire. Territories break away, wars are lost. Massive waves of refugees from the Balkans, the Caucasus, Crimea pour into the capital and reshape whole neighborhoods overnight. For a strange, brilliant stretch of decades, this is arguably one of the most cosmopolitan cities on the planet. And at the exact same time, the capital of a shrinking, struggling empire. And then a world war comes and erases the empire entirely. From 1914 through the early 1930s, the city lives through a kind of whiplash that would break most places. First, wartime shortages, bread lines, men gone to distant fronts. By 1918, with the war lost, Allied warships, British, French, Italian, anchor in the Bosphorus. For several years after the war, foreign troops patrol familiar streets. Checkpoints in Pera, officers billeted in grand apartment blocks, flags that aren't Ottoman flying over government buildings. Then, across Anatolia, a resistance movement gathers under Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk. The War of Independence ends with foreign troops sailing out and a new state being declared. In 1923, the Turkish Republic is founded, and, in a decision that reshapes the city forever, the new republic chooses a different capital. Ankara, inland, defensible, a fresh start. For the first time in over 1600 years, this is not the capital of an empire. The last sultan leaves, quietly, by sea. A few months later comes another seismic shift, a population exchange agreed with Greece. Hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Christians, many whose families had lived in these neighborhoods for generations, move out. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims from Greece move in. The texture of entire districts changes inside a few years. The ferries keep running under all of it. Commuters still cross the Bosphorus morning and evening. Fishermen still fish off the Galata Bridge. In the decades that follow, the city's name is officially standardized in international use: Istanbul. And now, a quieter period. The population actually drops for years. Wealth, administration, many old communities have gone elsewhere. The grand 19th century boulevards feel emptier. Here's the quiet surprise. That lull is part of why the old city core survives. Less redevelopment pressure. The Ottoman streets, the Byzantine walls, still stand because no money came to knock them down. Then, mid-century, the countryside starts moving in. From the mid-20th century onward, Istanbul does something almost nobody has ever seen a historic city do. It grows vertical, horizontal, and ferocious, all at once. Buses pull in from Anatolia daily, full of families with suitcases and carpets. They find land on the hillsides at the edges and build overnight. A practice locals nickname Gecekondu, literally landed in the night. Whole neighborhoods appear before municipal maps catch up. Power gets tapped later, roads come later, people arrive first. In 1973, the first Bosphorus Bridge opens, the first road link in history between Europe and Asia across this strait. Suddenly, you can drive between continents on your commute. A second bridge follows, then a third. Highways cut through districts the Ottomans would have recognized. Skyscrapers climb north of the historic peninsula in a new business district called Levant. Banks, glass towers, helipads. Underground, metro tunnels push through rock that archaeologists keep stopping the crews to document. One rail project, Marmaray, opens in 2013. A train that runs under the Bosphorus itself, linking the two continents below the water. Cruise ships ease up to new terminals. Tourists stream into Hagia Sophia, the Grand Bazaar, Topkapi, by the millions every year. The call to prayer still rolls down the hills. On a summer night in Beyoğlu, you can hear it layered over club beats a block away. Street food sellers grill fish sandwiches at the Galata Bridge while commuters pour off ferries. In the old peninsula, teenagers take selfies in front of the same columns Constantine raised. Not quite aware, they're leaning on a 1700-year-old foundation. The growth has a dark side. Earthquake risk shadows everything. The North Anatolian Fault is close, and geologists have been warning about it for decades. Inequality. Gentrification pressures squeezing old neighborhoods. Heritage under strain as a city that once held a few 100,000 now balances more than 15 million on the same hills. And the quiet miracle underneath it all. Every single previous layer is still physically here. Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, early Republican. Not replaced, just built over. Which brings us back to where we started. The ferry reaches the Asian side. The dome of Hagia Sophia holds the last of the light. Somewhere below our feet, A Byzantine cistern is still full of water. Above us, a glass tower blinks red for aircraft. 26 centuries of living stacked under the soles of our shoes. The strait kept flowing. Everything around it kept rewriting itself. Istanbul isn't one city. It's every version of itself still here, layer on layer, refusing to disappear. So, what place should we time travel to next? Drop a city in the comments. Tell me where you want to stand on a ferry deck, and I'll put the shortlist together for the next build.